I never thought much about my life before all of this happened. I had a pretty normal routine. Wake up, go to work, come home, and repeat. I lived in a quiet suburb, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and nothing exciting ever really happens. That all changed the day I met her, my new neighbor. At first, I didn't think much of her. She seemed just like anyone else moving into the neighborhood, quiet, kept to herself, but there was something different about her that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Little did I know that my new neighbor wasn't just anyone. She was a queen, a fugitive queen from a distant galaxy, hiding from an interstellar government that wanted her dead. Her name was Verena. She looked human at first glance, tall, elegant, with piercing green eyes that seemed to hold secrets no one else could fathom. Her long dark hair shimmered in the light, almost as if it absorbed the sun's rays. She didn't talk much, and when she did, her voice was soft and measured, like she was always thinking carefully about what to say. I first noticed her when I saw her moving in, carrying boxes that looked far too heavy for someone of her build. Being the polite neighbor, I went over to introduce myself, offer help, and make some small talk. But the moment she looked at me, I knew something was off. There was this energy about her, something I couldn't explain. It wasn't just her appearance or the way she moved, though both were unnaturally graceful. No, it was deeper than that. It was like she was constantly on guard, as if the world around her was a threat she had to be ready for at any moment. I shrugged it off at first. Maybe she was just shy, or maybe she'd had a rough move. Either way, I decided not to pry and figured she'd open up in her own time. But then strange things started happening. It began with little things. Lights flickering in her house at odd hours of the night, strange sounds coming from her backyard, and the occasional glimpse of something unusual. One evening, while I was taking out the trash, I caught a glimpse of her through the window. She wasn't alone. Two figures stood with her, their forms blurred, like they were vibrating at an unnatural frequency. I blinked, thinking it was just my imagination, but when I looked again, they were gone. I shook my head, telling myself I was just tired, that I had imagined it. But deep down, I knew something was going on. It wasn't until one night, a few weeks later, that the truth came crashing down on me. I had just gotten home from work, tired and ready to collapse on the couch, when there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened it, there she was, Verena, looking more anxious than I had ever seen her. Her eyes darted around as if she expected someone to jump out from the shadows at any moment. "I need your help," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I blinked, trying to process what was happening. Sure, what's going on?" She glanced over her shoulder, then back at me. "There's no time to explain. Can I come in?" Something in her tone made me step aside without thinking. She slipped inside, and I closed the door behind her. The tension in the air was palpable. I could feel it like a weight pressing down on my chest. "I'm not who you think I am," she began, her voice still low, as if someone might overhear us. "My name isn't Verena, at least not here. On my planet, I'm known as Queen Varenthia." "Queen?" I echoed, the word feeling foreign in my mouth. "Wait, what?" she nodded, her green eyes locking onto mine. "I come from a planet called Astria, far beyond your galaxy. I was the queen of my people, but a coup overthrew my rule. The new regime is hunting me, and now they've tracked me to Earth." The words hung in the air between us, thick with gravity. I stared at her, trying to make sense of what she was telling me. Queen, coup, interstellar fugitives. This wasn't just a neighborhood drama. This was something out of a science fiction movie. But the look in her eyes told me she was deadly serious. "I know it's a lot to take in," she said softly, as if reading my thoughts. "But I need your help. The people who overthrew me are dangerous, and they won't stop until they've captured or killed me." I ran a hand through my hair, my mind racing. "Okay, but why me? I mean, why come to me for help?" Her gaze softened, and for a moment I saw a vulnerability in her that I hadn't noticed before. "Because I trust you," she said simply. "I've been watching, and I know you're a good person. I can't do this alone." I let out a long breath, still trying to wrap my head around the situation. A part of me wanted to turn her away, to tell her that this was too big, too dangerous for me to handle. But another part of me, the part that couldn't ignore the fear in her eyes, knew that I couldn't just leave her to fend for herself. All right, I said finally. What do you need me to do? Relief washed over her face, and she took a step closer. For now, I need a place to hide. They're coming for me, and it won't be long before they find this house. Wait, they're coming here? I asked, my heart skipping a beat. She nodded. I've been able to keep them at bay for a while, but their tracking technology is too advanced. They'll find me sooner or later. I glanced around my small, modest home. It wasn't exactly a fortress, but it would have to do for now. Okay, you can stay here. But what happens when they find out where you are? I mean, I'm just a regular guy. I don't exactly have experience fighting off interstellar assassins. A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. You won't have to fight them. I can take care of that. But I'll need your help to stay off their radar. They're monitoring communications, looking for any sign of me. We'll need to be careful. I nodded, still feeling out of my depth but determined to help her. Okay, let's get you settled. Over the next few days, Verena, or Queen Varenthia, as I had to remind myself, settled into my home. I made a makeshift bed for her in the spare room, and we did our best to lay low. But even though we kept a low profile, the tension never left. Every time there was a sound outside, every time the phone rang, I felt my heart leap into my throat. It was only a matter of time before they found us, and then, one night, they did. It started with a strange humming sound, barely audible at first, but growing louder by the second. Verena was the first to notice. She tensed, her eyes narrowing as she stood from the couch and moved to the window. I followed her, my stomach twisting into knots as I saw what she was looking at. A ship, sleek, black, and utterly alien, hovered just above the street outside. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before, its surface rippling like liquid metal. And I knew, without a doubt, that it wasn't here for a friendly visit. They found me, Verena said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. What do we do? I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. She turned to me, her expression resolute. We fight. Her words echoed in my mind as the gravity of the situation settled over me. Fight? I wasn't prepared for this. I was just an ordinary guy with an ordinary life, and now I was about to go toe-to-toe with interstellar assassins? The very thought sent a shiver down my spine, but there was no time to panic. Verena was already moving, grabbing a sleek, metallic device from the bag she had brought with her when she first arrived. It looked like some kind of weapon, though it was unlike any gun or knife I had ever seen. The surface of the device shimmered with a soft blue light, and as she held it, her expression shifted from fear to fierce determination. Stay behind me, she said, her voice low but commanding. I didn't argue. I could hear the hum of the ship growing louder, the sound vibrating through the walls of the house. Outside, the ship began to descend, casting long, ominous shadows across the street. The air felt heavy, charged with a strange energy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The ship touched down, and for a moment, everything went still. I held my breath, waiting for something to happen, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, with a hiss, the door of the ship slid open, and 3 figures stepped out. They were tall, even taller than Verena, and clad in dark, armored suits that gleamed under the streetlights. Their faces were obscured by helmets, but I could feel the menace radiating off them in waves. These were no ordinary soldiers. These were assassins, interstellar bounty hunters sent to capture or kill the Queen. Verena tensed, her hand gripping the weapon tightly. Get ready, she whispered. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I wasn't a fighter. I had no idea what I was doing, but I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. I had to help her, even if I didn't know how. The lead bounty hunter stepped forward, his helmeted gaze locked on the house. We know you're in there, Varenthia, he called, his voice distorted by some kind of translator. Come out, and we'll make this quick. Verena didn't respond. She stayed perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the bounty hunters, her muscles coiled like a spring ready to snap. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, as the seconds stretched into what felt like hours. The bounty hunter stepped closer, his hand resting on a strange, alien weapon strapped to his side. Last chance, he said, his voice low and threatening. Come out, or we come in. And then, in the blink of an eye, Verena moved. She darted forward, faster than I could have imagined, her weapon raised and ready. A blinding flash of blue light erupted from the device, and I heard the crackle of energy as it connected with the bounty hunter's armor. He staggered back, momentarily stunned, but the other two were already moving. "Stay back," Verena shouted, her voice sharp with command. "I'll handle this." I wanted to argue, to tell her that I could help, but the truth was, I had no idea what I was doing. All I could do was watch as she engaged the bounty hunters in a fight that was far beyond anything I could comprehend. The battle was fierce, fast, and brutal. Verena moved like a warrior born, her strikes precise and deadly. The bounty hunters fought back with equal ferocity, but it was clear that they were no match for her. She was faster, stronger, and more skilled than any of them. This was her world, her battlefield, and she fought with the strength of someone who had spent a lifetime preparing for this moment. In the span of a few heart-pounding minutes, the battle came to a sudden and decisive end. The bounty hunters lay defeated. Their armored forms sprawled across the street. Verena stood over them, her weapon still humming with energy, her chest rising and falling with the effort of the fight. She was victorious, but the look in her eyes told me that this was only the beginning. I stepped out onto the porch, my legs trembling with the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. "Is it Elva?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Verena turned to me, her expression unwritable. "For now, but they'll send more. The coup's leaders won't stop until I'm either dead or captured." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was real. This wasn't some nightmare I could wake up from. My neighbor, this mysterious woman who had entered my life just weeks ago, was a fugitive queen from another world, and now I was tangled up in her fight for survival. "What are we supposed to do?" I asked, feeling a sense of helplessness wash over me. "We need to leave," she said, her voice steady. "We're not safe here anymore. They'll be tracking the signal from their ship, and it's only a matter of time before reinforcements arrive." I nodded, still struggling to keep up with everything that was happening. "Where do we go?" Verena's gaze shifted to the sky, her green eyes sharp and focused. "There are places we can hide, allies who can help us, but we need to move fast." And just like that, we were on the run. Over the next few hours, we packed up what little we could carry and slipped away under the cover of darkness. Verena led the way, her movements quick and efficient. I followed her, my mind still spinning with questions. Questions I wasn't sure I was ready to ask. We traveled by foot, avoiding main roads and sticking to the shadows. Verena seemed to know exactly where we were going, though she didn't share many details with me. Every now and then, she would pause, her head tilted as if listening for something, before motioning for me to keep moving. It wasn't until we reached the outskirts of the city that I finally worked up the courage to speak. "Why me?" I asked, my voice quiet in the stillness of the night. "Why did you come to me for help? There must be other people who are better suited for this." She glanced at me, her expression softening. "Because you're different," she said simply. "You're not like the others. You don't ask questions, you don't pry, and you don't judge. You saw me for who I am, not what I represent." I didn't know how to respond to that. In truth, I had always considered myself a bit of a loner, someone who kept to himself, who didn't get involved in other people's business. But now, here I was, protecting an alien queen from interstellar bounty hunters. It was a far cry from the quiet life I had once known. We continued on in silence, the weight of the situation hanging heavy between us. I could feel the tension in the air, the sense that we were being watched, hunted. It was only a matter of time before the next wave of bounty hunters came for us. But even as the fear gnawed at me, there was a part of me that felt something else, something unexpected. I felt responsible for Verena. She had trusted me, confided in me, and now I was the only one standing between her and certain death. It was a strange feeling, one I wasn't sure I fully understood, but it was enough to keep me moving, to keep me fighting alongside her. As dawn began to break, casting a soft golden light over the landscape, we found shelter in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't much, but it would do for now. Verena moved swiftly, setting up some kind of makeshift defense system using the technology she had brought with her. I watched in awe as she worked, her hands moving with practiced precision. "How do you know so much about all of this?" I asked, Genuinely curious, she didn't look up from her work as she answered. On Astria, I was trained in many disciplines: combat, strategy, survival. My people value knowledge, especially in times of crisis. I was raised to lead, to protect. There it was again, the reminder that Verena wasn't just any ordinary woman. She was royalty, a queen who had been overthrown by her enemies, and now she was fighting for her life in a world far from her own. As the hours passed, I found myself asking more questions, eager to learn more about her and the world she had come from. She told me about Astria, a planet of breathtaking beauty, with towering crystal spires that reached into the sky and oceans that shimmered like liquid silver. She spoke of her people, the Astrians, who were known for their wisdom and grace, but there was also a sadness in her voice as she described the war that had torn her planet apart, the coup that had taken everything from her. They were once my allies, she said quietly, her green eyes distant as she recalled the events that had led her to Earth. But greed and ambition corrupt even the most noble hearts. The ones who overthrew me wanted power, control over the resources of our world. They saw me as an obstacle. I could hear the pain in her voice, the weight of the betrayal that still lingered in her heart. It was clear that Verena had lost much more than just her throne. She had lost her people, her home, and everything she had once known. "I'm sorry," I said softly, not knowing what else to say. She glanced at me, offering a small, sad smile. "It's not your fault, but thank you." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything hanging heavy between us. It was strange, the bond that had formed between us in such a short time. I had never expected to find myself in this situation, protecting an alien queen from interstellar assassins. But here I was, and there was no turning back now. As the days passed, we remained hidden in the warehouse, constantly on edge, waiting for the next attack. Verena continued to teach me more about her world, her people, and the forces that were hunting her. It was a crash course in interstellar politics, and I found myself struggling to keep up with the complex web of alliances, betrayals, and power struggles that had led to her exile. Despite the danger we were in, I began to feel a strange sense of purpose. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just drifting through my days. I was part of something bigger, something that mattered. I was protecting someone, fighting for something worth fighting for. Verena, too, seemed to change during those days in hiding. She had always been strong, fierce, and determined, but now I saw a different side of her, a softer, more vulnerable side. She shared stories of her childhood, of the dreams she had once had for her people, dreams that had been shattered by the coup. "I wanted to lead my people into a new era," she said one evening, her voice quiet in the dim light of the warehouse. "A time of peace, of prosperity. But now, all of that is gone." I didn't know what to say. I could see the pain in her eyes, the weight of the loss that still hung over her. But there was also a fire in her, a determination to keep fighting, to survive. "You can still make things right," I said, surprising even myself with the conviction in my voice. "You're still here. You're still the queen. And as long as you're alive, there's hope." She looked at me, her green eyes softening. "You really believe that?" I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. "I do. You're not alone in this, Verena. I'm with you." For a moment, we just stared at each other, the bond between us growing stronger with each passing second. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what happened, I would fight to protect her, to help her reclaim what was rightfully hers. But our moment of peace was short-lived. That night, as we slept, I was jolted awake by a sound, a soft, high-pitched whine that sent a chill down my spine. I sat up, my heart racing as I tried to place the sound. It was faint, barely audible, but it was there, a constant, pulsing noise that seemed to be coming from outside. I glanced over at Verena, who was already awake, her eyes sharp and alert. "They've found us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't need to ask who they were. I knew. The bounty hunters had tracked us down, and now they were closing in. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing. This was it, the moment I had been dreading since the day Verena first knocked on my door. The bounty hunters had found us, and now we were trapped. Verena was already in motion, moving with the grace and efficiency of a seasoned warrior. She grabbed her weapon, the same sleek, metallic device she had used during the first attack, and turned to me with a steely determination in her eyes. "Stay close to me," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We don't have much time." I nodded, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands were shaking, but I forced myself to stay calm. Verena needed me, and I wasn't going to let her down. The sound of the wine grew louder, and I could feel the air in the warehouse grow heavy with tension. I glanced toward the entrance, half expecting the door to burst open at any moment. "We need to move," Verena said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "They'll be here any second." I followed her without hesitation, my mind still reeling from the fear that gripped me. But as we made our way toward the back of the warehouse, something caught my eye. A faint glimmer of light, barely noticeable in the darkness. I stopped in my tracks, squinting at the source of the light. "Verena, wait." She turned to me, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What is it?" I pointed toward the far corner of the room, where the light seemed to be flickering. "There's something over there." Verena's eyes narrowed as she followed my gaze. Without a word, she moved toward the light, her weapon at the ready. I followed closely behind, my heart racing as I wondered what we were about to find. As we approached the source of the light, I saw it. A small metallic device embedded in the wall. It was pulsing with a soft blue glow, the same color as the energy weapon Verena carried. "What is that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Verena's expression darkened. "A tracker." I felt my stomach drop. "You mean they've been tracking us this whole time?" She nodded, her jaw clenched in anger. "They must have planted it during the first attack. They've been monitoring our movements, waiting for the right moment to strike." I cursed under my breath, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. We had been sitting ducks, and now the bounty hunters were closing in, ready to finish the job. "We need to destroy it," Verena said, her voice sharp with urgency. "But we don't have much time. They're almost here." Without hesitation, she raised her weapon and fired a blast of blue energy at the tracker. The device sparked and sputtered before exploding in a shower of sparks, the light flickering out as it was destroyed, but the damage had already been done. The bounty hunters knew where we were, and now they were coming for us. We didn't have long. The tracker may have been destroyed, but it wouldn't stop the bounty hunters from finding us. They were already too close. Verena wasted no time. She grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the back exit of the warehouse. "We have to go now." I stumbled after her, my mind still racing from the discovery of the tracker. I couldn't believe we had been so careless that we hadn't noticed it sooner. But there was no time for regrets. We had to move, and fast. As we pushed open the back door and stepped out into the cool night air, I could hear the faint sound of approaching ships, the low hum of their engines growing louder with each passing second. They were coming. Verena led the way, her weapon at the ready, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. I followed closely behind, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to keep up with her. The fear that had been gnawing at me since this whole ordeal began was now a full-blown panic, but I forced myself to stay focused. We had to get out of here. The warehouse was surrounded by an industrial complex, a maze of narrow alleyways and towering buildings. It was dark, the only light coming from the occasional flickering street lamp, casting long shadows across the ground. "We'll lose them in the maze," Verena said, her voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. "Stay close to me, and don't stop." I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. I didn't know where we were going, or how we were going to get out of this, but I trusted Verena. She had gotten us this far, and I knew she wouldn't let them take us without a fight. We moved quickly, darting through the alleyways, the sound of the ships growing louder behind us. Every now and then, I would glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see the dark figures of the bounty hunters closing in on us. But they hadn't found us yet. Not yet. As we rounded a corner, Verena suddenly stopped, holding up a hand to signal me to stop as well. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest as I listened for any sign of danger. "They're close," she whispered, her green eyes narrowing as she scanned the alley ahead of us. "But we can still outrun them." I didn't need any more encouragement. We took off again, our footsteps echoing off the walls of the buildings around us. My legs burned with the effort, my lungs aching with each breath, but I pushed through the pain. We had to keep going. We had to stay ahead of them. And then, just as we were about to round another corner, I heard it. A sharp, metallic clang, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind us. "They're here," Verena hissed. The sound of footsteps sent a jolt of fear through me. They were close. Too close. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, but I couldn't afford to lose my focus now. Not when we were this far in. Verena didn't hesitate. She spun around, her weapon raised, her eyes blazing with determination. "Keep moving," she ordered, her voice steady despite the urgency in her tone. "I'll hold them off." I opened my mouth to argue, to tell her that I wouldn't leave her behind, but the look in her eyes stopped me. She wasn't asking for permission. She was giving an order. She needed me to keep going, to stay ahead of the bounty hunters. Reluctantly, I nodded and turned to run, my heart pounding in my chest as I darted down the alleyway. But even as I ran, I couldn't shake the fear that I was abandoning her, leaving her to face the bounty hunters alone. I hadn't made it more than a few steps when I heard the familiar crackle of energy weapons firing behind me. I skidded to a stop, my breath catching in my throat as I turned back to see Verena locked in battle with the bounty hunters. She was holding her own, her movements quick and precise as she dodged their attacks, her weapons slicing through the air with deadly accuracy. But she was outnumbered, and I knew she couldn't hold them off forever. Without thinking, I rushed back toward her, my mind racing as I tried to figure out how I could help. I didn't have a weapon, didn't have any combat training, but I couldn't just stand by and watch her fight alone. As I approached, I saw one of the bounty hunters raise his weapon, aiming it directly at Verena's back. My heart leapt into my throat, and before I could think about what I was doing, I shouted, "Verena, behind you!" She reacted instantly, spinning around just in time to deflect the shot with her weapon. The energy blast ricocheted off her blade, sending sparks flying as it slammed into the wall behind her. Verena's gaze snapped to mine, a mixture of surprise and anger flashing in her eyes. "I told you to keep moving," she shouted, her voice tight with frustration. "I couldn't just leave you." I shot back, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. Before she could respond, another bounty hunter lunged at her, and she was forced to turn her attention back to the fight. I stood frozen, my mind racing as I tried to figure out what to do. I couldn't just stand there and watch. I had to help. But how? My eyes darted around the alley, searching for anything I could use, anything that might give us an edge. And then I saw it. A pile of crates stacked against the wall, just a few feet away. Without thinking, I rushed toward them, my heart pounding in my chest as I grabbed one of the crates and hurled it toward the bounty hunters. It wasn't much, but it was enough to distract them, to give Verena the opening she needed. She moved quickly, taking advantage of the distraction to disarm one of the bounty hunters with a swift, precise strike. The second one wasn't far behind, his weapon clattering to the ground as Verena delivered a powerful kick that sent him sprawling. For a moment, there was silence. The bounty hunters lay defeated at her feet, their weapons scattered across the ground. Verena stood over them, her chest heaving with the effort of the fight, her green eyes blazing with a mixture of triumph and relief. I stood there, breathing hard, watching as Verena surveyed the scene. The tension in the air was palpable, the aftermath of the battle hanging heavy between us. I had never seen anything like it, never experienced anything like this in my entire life. Verena glanced over at me, her expression softening as she let out a long breath. "You shouldn't have come back," she said quietly, her voice filled with a mixture of frustration and gratitude. "But, thank you." I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. "I couldn't just leave you." She gave me a small, tired smile, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the woman beneath the warrior, the queen who had lost everything, yet still fought with every ounce of strength she had left. "We need to keep moving," she said after a moment, her voice returning to its usual calm, steady tone. "There will be more." I didn't need to be told twice. We quickly gathered what little we had and continued our journey through the dark, narrow alleyways of the industrial complex. My heart was still racing from the battle, but there was no time to rest, no time to let my guard down. The bounty hunters would send reinforcements, and we had to stay ahead of them. As we moved, I couldn't help but steal glances at Verena. She was unlike anyone I had ever met, strong, resilient, and fiercely determined. And yet, beneath all of that, there was a vulnerability, a sadness that weighed heavy on her heart. She had lost so much, had been forced to flee from her own people, and now she was fighting to survive in a world that wasn't her own. I wanted to help her, to do more than just run from the bounty hunters. But I didn't know how. I wasn't a fighter, wasn't trained in combat like she was. All I could do was follow her lead, trust that she knew what she was doing. The hours passed in a blur of movement and tension. Every shadow, every sound sent a jolt of fear through me. But Verena remained calm, her eyes sharp and focused as she led us deeper into the maze of alleyways. Eventually, we reached the edge of the industrial complex, emerging onto a quiet, deserted street. The city lights flickered in the distance, casting long, eerie shadows across the ground. It felt surreal, like we were the only two people left in the world. "We'll be safe here for a while," Verena said, her voice breaking the silence. I nodded, too tired to speak. My legs ached from all the running, and my mind was still reeling from everything that had happened. But despite the exhaustion, I felt a strange sense of relief. We had made it this far, and for now, we were still alive. As we settled down in a small, abandoned building on the outskirts of the city, I finally allowed myself to relax, just a little. Verena had set up a perimeter, using the same alien technology she had used before to detect any approaching threats. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give us a few precious moments of rest. I leaned back against the wall, closing my eyes for a moment, trying to process everything that had happened. The bounty hunters, the fight, the endless running. It all felt like a blur, like some kind of twisted dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was real. And it wasn't over yet. As I sat there in the quiet darkness of the abandoned building, my mind raced with thoughts of what was to come. Verena had told me that the bounty hunters wouldn't stop until they had captured her, that their leaders wouldn't rest until she was either dead or imprisoned. And now that I was involved, I knew that my life would never be the same. I wasn't just running from danger anymore. I was part of something bigger, something far beyond my understanding. I had become Verena's protector, her ally in this fight for survival. And while I didn't know how long we could keep running, I knew that I wouldn't abandon her. Verena sat across from me, her weapon resting at her side as she scanned the area with a practiced, vigilant gaze. Even in the dim light, I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weariness that came from weeks, maybe even months of being hunted. "Do you ever think about going back?" I asked quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. "Going back to Astria?" I nodded. "Yeah. Do you ever think about reclaiming your throne, taking back what's yours?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. Her gaze shifted to the window, her green eyes distant as she considered my question. I could see the conflict in her, the weight of her past hanging heavy on her shoulders. "I think about it every day," she said finally, her voice soft. "But it's not that simple. My people, they've moved on. The new regime is strong, and there are those who support them. If I were to return, it would be a war, and I'm not sure that's what's best for Astria." I frowned, surprised by her answer. "But you're the rightful queen. Don't you want to take back what was stolen from you?" She smiled, but there was no joy in it. Being a queen isn't about power or titles, it's about responsibility. My people have suffered enough. I don't want to drag them into another war, not if there's another way. I couldn't help but admire her for that. She could have been angry, bitter, and determined to reclaim her throne at any cost. But instead, she was thinking about her people, about what was best for them, even if it meant sacrificing her own desires. "You're a good leader," I said quietly. "Your people were lucky to have you." She looked at me, her eyes softening. "Thank you, but I'm not a leader anymore. I'm just a fugitive, trying to survive." I shook my head. "No, you're more than that." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I didn't know what the future held for Verena or for me. But I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't let her face it alone. As the night wore on, we remained in the abandoned building, keeping watch for any signs of danger. The bounty hunters hadn't found us yet, but it was only a matter of time. I could feel the tension in the air, the sense that something was coming, and I knew that when it did, we would be ready. The days blurred together as Verena and I continued our journey, always on the run, always looking over our shoulders. The bounty hunters were relentless, tracking us from one hiding spot to another, never giving us more than a moment's peace. But somehow, we managed to stay one step ahead thanks to Verena's skills and quick thinking. We moved from city to city, never staying in one place for too long. Verena had contacts, people she could trust, allies who had helped her before. They gave us shelter when we needed it, provided supplies, and passed along information about the bounty hunters' movements. It wasn't an easy life, but we were surviving. And in a strange way, I began to feel a sense of purpose in all of it. I wasn't just drifting through my days anymore. I was fighting for something, protecting someone who needed me. And despite the danger, despite the fear that gnawed at me every day, I found a strange kind of peace in it. Verena, too, seemed to change during those days on the run. She was still the fierce, determined warrior I had first met, but there was a softness to her now, a vulnerability that she didn't try to hide. She confided in me more, told me about her past, her hopes, and her fears. We had become more than just allies. We had become friends. And as the bond between us grew stronger, I found myself wondering what would happen when this was all over. Would she stay on Earth? Would she return to Astria? Or would she continue to run, always looking over her shoulder, always fighting to survive? I didn't know the answers to those questions, but I knew one thing. I didn't want to lose her. One evening, as we sat by the fire in one of our temporary hideouts, I asked her a question that had been on my mind for weeks. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" I asked, my voice soft in the quiet of the night. "After all of this is over, I mean." She looked at me, her green eyes thoughtful. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've been running for so long, I haven't had time to think about what comes next." I nodded, understanding. "But if you could choose, what would you want?" She was silent for a long moment, her gaze distant as she considered my question. "I want peace," she said finally. "I want to stop running. I want to live a life where I'm not constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next attack." I could hear the longing in her voice, the deep, aching desire for a life that had been stolen from her. And in that moment, I realized just how much she had lost. Her home, her people, her future. She had been forced to leave it all behind, and now she was left with nothing but memories and a distant hope for a better tomorrow. "I think you deserve that," I said softly, my heart aching for her. "You deserve a chance to be happy, to live a life free from all of this." She smiled, but it was a sad, wistful smile. "Maybe one day," she said quietly, "but right now my only focus is survival." I nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Survival, that was all that mattered in this moment. Everything else, the future, peace, happiness, it would have to wait until we had dealt with the bounty hunters once and for all. We sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling softly as we both lost ourselves in our thoughts. I could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken fear that hung between us. We had been lucky so far, managing to stay ahead of the bounty hunters, but I knew it couldn't last forever. Eventually they would catch up to us. And when they did, I wasn't sure if we'd be able to escape again. As the fire burned low, Verena suddenly sat up, her eyes sharp and alert. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I strained to listen, but all I could hear was the crackle of the fire and the distant sounds of the night. "I don't hear anything," I said, my voice filled with confusion. But Verena wasn't listening to me. She was already on her feet, her weapon in hand, her eyes scanning the darkness outside our hideout. "They're here," she said, her voice tight with urgency. My heart skipped a beat, and I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing with fear. The bounty hunters had found us again. Without waiting for an explanation, I followed Verena out of the hideout, my heart pounding in my chest as we darted into the shadows. The night was eerily quiet, but I could feel the tension in the air, the sense that something was coming. We moved quickly, slipping through the dark alleyways and narrow streets of the city, always staying one step ahead of the bounty hunters. But I could hear them now. The faint hum of their ships, the low rumble of their engines as they searched for us. "They're closing in," Verena said, her voice barely audible over the sound of our footsteps. We need to get to higher ground. I didn't argue. I followed her without question, trusting her instincts as we made our way toward the tallest building in the area. A crumbling, abandoned skyscraper that loomed over the city like a sentinel. We reached the base of the building, and Verena wasted no time in leading me up the narrow stairwell. The air was thick with dust, and the stairs creaked under our weight, but we pressed on, determined to reach the top before the bounty hunters found us. By the time we reached the roof, my lungs were burning from the effort, and my legs felt like they were made of lead. But there was no time to rest. The bounty hunters were close, too close. Verena moved to the edge of the roof, her eyes scanning the horizon. In the distance, I could see the faint lights of the bounty hunters' ships, their searchlights sweeping across the city as they hunted for us. "We're running out of time," she said, her voice tight with tension. "We need a plan." My mind raced as I tried to come up with a solution, but I was out of ideas. We had been on the run for so long, always managing to stay one step ahead of the bounty hunters. But now, it felt like we had finally run out of places to hide. Verena turned to me, her green eyes filled with determination. "We can't keep running," she said, her voice steady. "We have to face them." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "You mean, fight them?" She nodded, her expression resolute. "It's the only way. We've been running for too long. They won't stop until I'm captured or dead. The only way to end this is to take them down." The idea of facing the bounty hunters head-on terrified me. I wasn't a fighter. I didn't know the first thing about combat, but I trusted Verena. If she thought we could take them down, then I would follow her lead. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. Verena's gaze shifted to the horizon, her eyes narrowing as she studied the approaching ships. "We use their own technology against them," she said after a moment. "Their ships are equipped with tracking devices and energy shields. If we can disable those, we'll have a chance to take them out." I frowned, not entirely sure how we were going to pull that off. "How do we disable their shields?" A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "Leave that to me." Before I could ask what she meant, Verena turned and moved toward a small control panel that was hidden behind a vent on the roof. I watched in awe as she worked, her fingers flying over the controls with practiced precision. "What are you doing?" I asked, unable to contain my curiosity. "I'm hacking into their systems," she explained, her voice calm and focused. "The bounty hunters are using a low-frequency signal to communicate with each other. If I can tap into that signal, I can disable their shields and tracking devices." My eyes widened in surprise. "You can do that?" She shot me a quick glance, her lips curving into a small, confident smile. I didn't become queen by accident. I couldn't help but smile at that. Verena was full of surprises, and I was constantly amazed by her resourcefulness and intelligence. She wasn't just a warrior, she was a leader, a strategist, and someone who was willing to do whatever it took to protect her people. As she worked, I moved to the edge of the roof, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched the bounty hunters' ships grow closer. The searchlights swept across the city, inching ever closer to our location. "We're running out of time," I said, my voice tight with fear. "I'm almost there," Verena replied, her fingers still flying over the controls. I could feel the tension in the air, the sense of impending danger. Any second now, the bounty hunters would find us, and we would be out of options. But then, just as the first ship's searchlight swept over the rooftop, Verena let out a triumphant cry. "Got it." I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat as I saw her standing by the control panel, a look of satisfaction on her face. "Their shields are down," Verena said, her voice filled with triumph. "Now it's our turn." I felt a surge of adrenaline course through me as I realized what this meant. We finally had the upper hand. The bounty hunters were vulnerable, and for the first time since this nightmare began, we had a real chance to fight back. Verena moved quickly, pulling out her weapon and checking the settings. "Stay close to me," she instructed, her voice calm but commanding. "This is going to get messy." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I could do to help, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let Verena face this fight alone. As the first ship descended toward the rooftop, I could see the bounty hunters moving inside, their dark, armored figures silhouetted against the glow of the ship's lights. They were coming for us, and there was no turning back now. Verena took a deep breath, her green eyes blazing with determination. "Get ready," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The ship hovered just above the rooftop, its engines rumbling like a distant thunderstorm. I could feel the vibrations beneath my feet, the sheer power of the ship sending a shiver down my spine. And then, without warning, the door of the ship slid open, and the bounty hunters emerged. Verena didn't hesitate. She fired her weapon with precision, a blast of blue energy erupting from the device and slamming into the lead bounty hunter. He staggered back, momentarily stunned. But the others were already moving. I ducked behind a nearby vent, my heart racing as I watched Verena engage the bounty hunters in a fierce battle. She moved with the grace and agility of a trained warrior, her strikes quick and deadly. But even with their shields down, the bounty hunters were formidable opponents. One of them lunged at Verena, swinging a metallic blade that crackled with energy. She deflected the strike with her weapon, the clash of energy sending sparks flying. I watched in awe as she fought, her movements fluid and precise, as if she had been born for this. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw one of the bounty hunters break away from the fight, moving toward the control panel that Verena had used to disable their shields. My heart leapt into my throat as I realized what he was trying to do. He was going to reactivate the shields. Without thinking, I bolted from my hiding spot, my mind racing as I tried to figure out what to do. I wasn't a fighter, wasn't trained like Verena, but I couldn't let the bounty hunter succeed. If he reactivated the shields, we would lose our only advantage. I grabbed a piece of debris from the rooftop, a broken metal pipe, and swung it with all my strength, aiming for the bounty hunter's helmet. The impact was jarring, sending a shockwave up my arms, but it worked. The bounty hunter staggered, his hand slipping from the control panel as he turned to face me. For a brief, terrifying moment, I thought I was done for. The bounty hunter loomed over me, his armored form towering above me, his dark visor reflecting my own frightened face. But then, out of nowhere, Verena appeared. She moved like a blur, her weapon slicing through the air with deadly precision. In one swift motion, she disarmed the bounty hunter, sending his weapon clattering to the ground. Before he could react, she delivered a powerful kick to his chest, knocking him backward and away from the control panel. The bounty hunter hit the ground with a heavy thud, his armor dented from the force of Verena's strike. I stood there, breathless and wide-eyed, as I watched her finish the fight with a series of rapid, precise strikes that left the bounty hunter incapacitated. "Are you all right?" Verena asked, her voice steady but tinged with concern. I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. "Yeah, I think so." She gave me a small, reassuring smile before turning her attention back to the remaining bounty hunters. The fight wasn't over yet. With their shields down and their numbers dwindling, the bounty hunters were on the defensive. But they weren't giving up without a fight. One of them fired a blast of energy at Verena, but she deflected it with ease, her movements fluid and controlled. I watched in awe as she fought, her every move calculated and precise. She was a true warrior, and in that moment, I realized just how much she had been holding back during our time on the run. She had been in survival mode, always one step ahead of the bounty hunters, but now that we were facing them head-on, she was unleashing the full extent of her skills. As the last of the bounty hunters fell, Verena stood tall, her chest heaving with the effort of the fight. Her green eyes blazed with determination, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw a glimmer of hope in her expression. "We did it," I said, my voice filled with disbelief. Verena nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Yes, but we're not done yet." I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" She turned to me, her expression serious. "These were just the first wave. There will be more. The coup leaders won't stop until I'm either captured or dead." The weight of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had thought that defeating the bounty hunters would be the end of it, that we could finally stop running, but I should have known better. This fight was far from over. "So, what do we do now?" I asked, my voice filled with uncertainty. Verina's gaze shifted to the horizon, her eyes sharp and focused. We keep moving. We find allies. We take the fight to them. I stared at her, my mind racing with a mix of fear and determination. I wasn't a fighter. I had never been trained for this kind of life. But I wasn't going to abandon Verina. Not now. Not after everything we had been through together. Then let's do it, I said, surprising even myself with the conviction in my voice. I'm with you. Verina looked at me, her green eyes softening as a small, grateful smile crossed her face. Thank you, she said quietly. I couldn't do this without you. I felt a surge of warmth in my chest at her words. It was strange, the bond that had formed between us in such a short time. I had never expected to find myself in this situation, protecting an alien queen from interstellar assassins. But now, I couldn't imagine my life any other way. As we prepared to leave the rooftop, I glanced back at the fallen bounty hunters, their armored forms scattered across the ground. It was a sobering reminder of the dangers we faced, of the fight that was still ahead of us. But even as I stared at the aftermath of the battle, I felt a strange sense of hope. We had survived this far, and now we had the advantage. Verina's quick thinking and her ability to disable the bounty hunters' shields had given us the upper hand, and I knew that as long as we worked together, we stood a fighting chance. As we made our way down from the rooftop, the city below was eerily quiet. It was as if the entire world had paused, holding its breath in the aftermath of the battle. The streets were deserted, the buildings dark and silent, and the only sound was the faint hum of the wind as it swept through the alleyways. Verina moved with a sense of purpose, her steps quick and confident. I followed her, my heart still racing from the adrenaline of the fight. I didn't know where we were going, but I trusted her completely. She had led us this far, and I knew she had a plan. As we walked, I couldn't help but think about everything that had happened since Verina had first come into my life. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had knocked on my door, asking for help. Back then, I had been just an ordinary guy, living a quiet, uneventful life. But now, everything had changed. I had become part of something bigger than myself, something far beyond my understanding. I was no longer just a bystander. I was a protector, a fighter, and an ally in Verina's battle for survival. And while the danger still loomed over us, I felt a sense of purpose that I had never felt before. Verina glanced over at me as we walked, her green eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with concern. I nodded, offering her a small smile. "Yeah, I'm just processing everything." She gave me a sympathetic look. "I know this has been difficult for you, but you've been incredible. I couldn't have made it this far without you." Her words sent a warmth through me, and I felt a surge of pride. I had never thought of myself as particularly brave or capable, but hearing Verina's gratitude made me realize that I had played an important role in her survival. As we continued to walk, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the verge of something big. The battle with the bounty hunters had been a turning point, but it was clear that there was still a long road ahead. The coup leaders weren't going to give up easily, and we would have to stay one step ahead of them if we wanted to survive. Eventually, we reached the edge of the city, where a dense forest stretched out before us, its towering trees casting long shadows across the ground. Verina paused at the edge of the tree line, her gaze scanning the horizon. "This is where we'll make our stand," she said quietly, her voice filled with determination. I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" She turned to face me, her expression serious. "The bounty hunters will keep coming, and we can't keep running forever. This forest, it's the perfect place for an ambush. We can use the terrain to our advantage, set traps, and take them down one by one." I stared at her, my mind racing with a mixture of fear and excitement. An ambush? It was risky, but it was also our best shot at ending this once and for all. I could see the resolve in Verina's eyes, the fire that burned within her. She was done running. She was ready to fight, to take back control of her life and her future. And I knew that I would stand by her side no matter what. "Okay," I said, nodding in agreement. "Let's do it." Over the next few days, we worked tirelessly to prepare for the ambush. Verina had a wealth of knowledge about tactics and strategy, and she used every bit of it to our advantage. We scouted the forest, identifying key points where we could set traps and create choke points to slow down the bounty hunters. She taught me how to build simple but effective traps using the natural resources around us. Hidden pits, tripwires, and even makeshift barricades made from fallen trees and branches. It was hard work, but I threw myself into it with a sense of purpose and determination. As we worked, Verena continued to share more about her past, her people, and the coup that had forced her into exile. She told me about the leaders of the coup, a group of power-hungry elites who had conspired to overthrow her and take control of Austria's vast resources. They had been planning it for years, she explained, and when the time was right, they struck. They took everything from me, she said one evening as we sat by the fire, her voice filled with a quiet anger. My throne, my people, my family, all of it gone in an instant. I could hear the pain in her voice, the weight of the betrayal that still lingered in her heart. But there was also a strength in her, a determination to keep fighting to survive. I won't let them win, she continued, her green eyes blazing with resolve. I will reclaim my throne, and I will bring justice to those who betrayed me. Her words filled me with a sense of admiration and respect. Verena wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for her people, for the future of Austria, and I knew that I would do whatever it took to help her achieve that goal. As the days passed, our preparations were nearly complete. The forest had become a fortress, filled with traps and defenses that would slow down the bounty hunters and give us the upper hand. But despite all of our efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over me. The bounty hunters were relentless, and I knew that this ambush was a gamble. If we failed, there would be no second chance. But if we succeeded, we could finally end this. On the eve of the ambush, Verena and I sat by the fire, the crackling flames casting long shadows across the forest floor. The air was thick with tension, the weight of what was to come pressing down on us. Tomorrow, Verena said quietly, her voice filled with determination. It all ends tomorrow. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. Tomorrow, everything would change. One way or another, this nightmare would finally come to an end. As we sat in silence, I glanced over at Verena, my heart filled with a mixture of fear and hope. She had become more than just my neighbor, more than just an alien queen in exile. She had become my friend, my ally, and someone I cared deeply about. And I knew that no matter what happened tomorrow, I would fight to protect her. I would fight to ensure that she had the future she deserved. The morning of the ambush dawned cold and quiet. The forest was shrouded in mist, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine. It was a fitting backdrop for what was to come, the final showdown between us and the bounty hunters who had been relentlessly pursuing Verena for weeks. We moved through the forest with quiet efficiency, checking the traps and making sure everything was in place. Verena's weapon was strapped to her side, her expression calm and focused as she prepared for the fight ahead. I could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation of the coming battle pressing down on me like a weight. As we reached our vantage point, high up in the branches of a massive tree, I glanced over at Verena, my heart pounding in my chest. "Are you ready?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her green eyes filled with determination. "I've been ready for this my whole life." I swallowed hard, my hands trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. This was it, the moment we had been preparing for. The bounty hunters were coming, and we would either defeat them or be captured. There was no middle ground, no room for error. As the minutes ticked by, the forest remained eerily quiet. The only sound was the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant call of a bird somewhere in the trees. But I knew it wouldn't last. The bounty hunters would be here soon. And then, just as I had predicted, I heard it. The low hum of their ships, the faint sound of engines approaching from the east. My heart skipped a beat, and I glanced over at Verena, who was already in motion. "They're here," she said quietly, her voice steady. "Get into position." I nodded and scrambled to my designated spot, crouching behind a thick cluster of bushes that provided both cover and a clear view of the main path through the forest. Verena took up her position in the branches above, her weapon at the ready, her eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The tension was palpable, Every muscle in my body coiled like a spring, ready to snap at the first sign of danger. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for the bounty hunters to appear. And then they came. The first of the bounty hunters emerged from the mist like shadows, their dark, armored forms blending seamlessly with the trees. They moved with the precision of trained soldiers, their weapons drawn, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of us. I held my breath, my heart racing as I watched them move closer, their footsteps barely making a sound on the forest floor. They were hunting us, just as they had been for weeks. But this time, we were ready. As they passed beneath the tree where Verena was hidden, she struck. In one fluid motion, she dropped down from the branches, her weapon raised and firing before the bounty hunters even had a chance to react. A blinding flash of blue energy erupted from her device, slamming into the lead bounty hunter with a crackling sizzle. The bounty hunter staggered back, his armor smoking from the blast, but Verena didn't stop. She moved like a blur, her weapon slicing through the air with deadly precision as she engaged the rest of the group. The battle erupted into chaos in an instant. Verena's strikes were swift and calculated, her weapon a blur of motion as she took down the bounty hunters with a deadly efficiency. I watched in awe from my hiding spot, my heart pounding in my chest as she fought with the skill and precision of a seasoned warrior. But the bounty hunters were formidable opponents. Despite being caught off guard, they quickly regrouped, their weapons raised as they fired back at Verena. The air crackled with energy blasts, the bright flashes of blue and red lighting up the misty forest like fireworks. Verena dodged their attacks with ease, her movements fluid and graceful as she danced through the trees, always staying one step ahead of the bounty hunters. But even as she fought, I could see the strain in her movements, the toll that weeks of running and fighting had taken on her. I knew I couldn't just sit there and watch. I had to help her. Without thinking, I grabbed one of the makeshift traps we had set up, a bundle of sharp, thorn-covered vines tied together with a length of rope, and hurled it at one of the bounty hunters. The vines tangled around his legs, tripping him up and sending him crashing to the ground. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give Verena the opening she needed. She moved quickly, her weapon striking with precision as she took down the bounty hunter with a swift, powerful blow. But even as the last of the group fell, I could hear the distant hum of more ships approaching. "There's more coming!" I shouted, my voice filled with urgency. Verena didn't need to be told twice. She moved quickly, grabbing my arm and pulling me deeper into the forest. "We need to regroup," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "There's too many of them. We'll take them down in waves." I nodded, my heart racing as we darted through the trees, our footsteps barely making a sound on the soft forest floor. My mind was racing, trying to keep up with everything that was happening. We had taken down the first group of bounty hunters, but I knew that was just the beginning. As we reached another one of our prepared ambush points, Verena turned to me, her green eyes blazing with determination. "We can do this," she said, her voice filled with confidence. "We just need to stick to the plan." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know how much longer we could keep this up, but I trusted Verena. She had led us this far, and I knew she wouldn't let us fail. The second wave of bounty hunters arrived moments later, their ships hovering just above the treetops, the hum of their engines filling the air. They moved with the same precision as the first group, but this time, we were ready. Verena and I moved in tandem, using the traps and the terrain to our advantage. The bounty hunters were powerful, but they were out of their element. The dense forest, the hidden traps, and Verena's intimate knowledge of combat tactics gave us the upper hand. We fought for what felt like hours, each wave of bounty hunters more relentless than the last. But Verena was a force to be reckoned with, and together, we held our ground. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the forest fell silent once more. The bounty hunters lay defeated at our feet, their ships dark and lifeless above the treetops. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and the faint crackle of energy weapons, but the fight was over. We had won. The silence that followed the battle was deafening. The adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins began to ebb, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion that settled over me like a heavy blanket. I could hardly believe it. We had done it. We had taken down the bounty hunters. Verena stood beside me, her weapon still in hand, her chest rising and falling with the effort of the fight. Her face was streaked with dirt and sweat, but there was a triumphant gleam in her green eyes. She had fought like a true warrior, and I knew that without her, we wouldn't have stood a chance. I let out a long breath, my shoulders sagging with relief. "We did it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Verena nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Yes, but we can't stay here. There will be more." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. I had hoped that this would be the end, that we could finally stop running. But deep down, I knew she was right. The coup leaders wouldn't give up that easily. They would keep sending bounty hunters, keep coming after Verena until they had her. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice filled with uncertainty. Verena's gaze shifted to the horizon, her expression thoughtful. "We leave," she said finally. "We go to the only place where we might have a chance." I frowned, confused. "Where?" She turned to me, her green eyes filled with determination. "We go to Astria. We take the fight to them." The weight of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Astria, her home planet, the place she had been forced to flee when the coup had taken everything from her. The thought of going there, of facing the coup leaders head-on, was terrifying. But I could see the resolve in Verena's eyes, the fire that burned within her. She wasn't just running anymore. She was ready to fight, to reclaim what had been stolen from her. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and awe. She nodded, her expression resolute. "I'm sure. I've run long enough. It's time to face them." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. The idea of going to Astria, of facing the people who had betrayed Verena, was overwhelming. But I knew that I couldn't let her go alone. I had come this far with her, and I wasn't about to abandon her now. "Then I'm with you," I said, my voice filled with determination. "Whatever happens, I'm with you." Verena looked at me, her expression softening. For a moment, there was a vulnerability in her eyes, a flicker of gratitude that she didn't need to voice. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I couldn't do this without you." Her words sent a warmth through me, and I felt a surge of pride. I had never thought of myself as particularly brave or capable, but standing beside Verena, I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about justice, about taking back what had been stolen. As we prepared to leave the forest and make our way to the ship that would take us to Astria, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of fear and excitement. The road ahead was dangerous, filled with uncertainty and peril. But I knew that as long as I was with Verena, I could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, we would fight. Together, we would take back her throne, and together, we would win. As we made our way through the dense forest, leaving the remnants of the battle behind, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. I couldn't help but think about what was to come, what it would mean to travel to Astria, to face the very people who had forced Verena into exile. I had never left Earth before, had never even considered the possibility of traveling to another planet. But now, it seemed like the only path forward. Verena led the way, her steps sure and confident despite the danger that still loomed over us. She was determined, her gaze focused on the horizon as if she could already see her homeworld in the distance. I admired her strength, her resilience. No matter what had been thrown at her, she had never wavered in her resolve to survive. As we walked, I found myself asking the question that had been on my mind since Verena first mentioned returning to Astria. "What's it like?" I asked, my voice breaking the silence. "Astria, I mean, what's it like there?" Verena glanced over at me, her expression softening. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "Or at least, it was. The landscape is unlike anything you've ever seen. Towering crystal spires that shimmer in the sunlight, oceans of silver that stretch as far as the eye can see. It's a world filled with wonder and mystery." Her voice was filled with a deep, aching nostalgia, and I could hear the pain of loss in her words. Astria wasn't just her home, it was a part of her, a place that had shaped her into the person she was. And now, it was a place that had been taken from her. "I can't imagine losing all of that," I said softly, my heart aching for her. Verena nodded, her gaze distant as she stared at the trees ahead of us. It was hard, she admitted. But I didn't just lose my home, I lost my people, my family, my future. The coup leaders didn't just take my throne, they took everything. I felt a surge of anger on her behalf, a fierce desire to see justice done. Verena had been wronged in the worst way possible, and I knew that the only way to make things right was to help her reclaim what had been stolen. We'll make it right, I said, my voice filled with conviction. We'll take back what's yours. Verena looked at me, her green eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, she said quietly. I've been running for so long, it's hard to believe that this might actually be the end of it. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. We were on the cusp of something monumental, something that could change the course of her life, and mine, forever. But I knew that no matter what happened, I would stand by her side. As we reached the edge of the forest, the landscape opened up before us, revealing a small clearing where a sleek, silver ship was waiting. It was Verena's personal vessel, hidden away in this remote corner of the world, ready to take us to Astria. Verena moved quickly, leading me toward the ship with a sense of urgency. We don't have much time, she said. The coup leaders will be monitoring for any sign of my return. We'll need to move fast. I followed her up the ramp and into the ship, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. This was it, the moment we had been preparing for. We were leaving Earth, heading to Astria, to face the people who had wronged her. As the ship's engines roared to life and we lifted off the ground, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation building inside me. The journey ahead was dangerous, filled with uncertainty, but I knew that together we could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The journey to Astria was unlike anything I had ever experienced. As the ship hurtled through space, I stared out of the viewport, mesmerized by the vast expanse of stars that stretched out before us. It was beautiful, in a way that I had never imagined. The silence, the endlessness, it made me feel small, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But at the same time, I felt a strange sense of purpose. I was part of something bigger now, something that transcended the ordinary life I had once known. I was no longer just an earthling going about my daily routine. I was traveling through space with an alien queen, preparing to help her reclaim her throne. Verena sat beside me, her gaze focused on the console in front of her as she navigated the ship with practiced ease. She was calm, composed, but I could sense the tension in her. This was more than just a journey for her. It was a homecoming, a return to the place that had been taken from her. How long until we reach Astria? I asked, my voice breaking the silence. Verena glanced over at me, her expression thoughtful. Not long now, she said quietly. We're entering the outer edges of the Astrian system. We should be able to land within the next few hours. I nodded, feeling a mixture of anticipation and fear. The reality of what we were about to do was starting to sink in. We were heading straight into enemy territory, to confront the people who had overthrown Verena and taken control of her world. What's the plan? I asked, trying to keep the anxiety out of my voice. Verena's expression hardened. We'll land in a remote area, away from the capital. I still have allies on Astria, people who were loyal to me before the coup. We'll regroup with them, and from there, we'll launch a counterattack. Her words sent a shiver down my spine. A counterattack? I hadn't fully grasped just how dangerous this mission was. We weren't just sneaking onto Astria, we were going to start a rebellion. As if sensing my unease, Verena gave me a reassuring look. I know this is a lot to take in, she said softly, but I wouldn't have brought you if I didn't think you could handle it. I swallowed hard, nodding in response. I had come this far, and there was no turning back now. I trusted Verena, and I knew that she wouldn't lead us into this fight without a plan. As the ship entered Astria's atmosphere, the view outside the viewport shifted, revealing the breathtaking beauty of the planet below. Just as Verena had described, the landscape was unlike anything I had ever seen. Towering crystal spires jutted up from the ground, glinting in the sunlight, and vast oceans of silver stretched out as far as the eye could see. But there was something else, something darker. In the distance, I could see the outline of massive warships patrolling the skies, their dark, imposing forms a stark contrast to the beauty of the planet below. They've fortified the capital, Verena said, her voice filled with a mixture of anger and sadness. The coup leaders have turned Astria into a military stronghold. I felt a knot of fear tighten in my chest as I realized the enormity of the task ahead of us. We were about to face an entire army, a regime that had taken control of Astria through force and fear, but I knew that Verena was determined. She had come too far, endured too much to turn back now. "We'll make it," I said, my voice filled with conviction. "We'll take back your throne." Verena looked at me, her green eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "I couldn't do this without you." As we descended toward the surface of Astria, my heart raced with a mixture of fear and excitement. The reality of what we were about to do hit me with full force. We were about to launch a rebellion, to take on the very people who had overthrown Verena and stolen her throne. The ship touched down in a remote area, far from the prying eyes of the regime. The landscape around us was stunning. Crystal spires rose up from the ground, casting long shadows across the silver plains. It was a world of beauty, but also a world that had been scarred by war. Verena moved quickly, gathering her supplies and motioning for me to follow. "We need to move fast," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "The longer we stay in one place, the greater the risk of being discovered." I nodded and followed her out of the ship, my heart pounding in my chest as we stepped onto the surface of Astria. The air was cool and crisp, and the ground beneath my feet shimmered with an otherworldly glow. It was beautiful, but I couldn't shake the feeling of danger that hung over us like a dark cloud. We made our way through the crystal spires, moving quickly and quietly. Verena led the way, her eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. I could tell that she was on high alert, her senses honed by years of training and experience. As we reached a secluded clearing, Verena stopped and turned to me. "This is where we'll meet my allies," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and determination. "They've been waiting for this moment for a long time." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the moment we had been preparing for. The fate of Astria rested on what happened next. We waited in silence, the tension in the air thick and heavy. I could feel my nerves fraying with each passing second, my mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. But Verena remained calm, her gaze focused on the horizon. And then, in the distance, I saw them, figures emerging from the shadows, moving toward us with purpose. As they drew closer, I could see that they were a mix of soldiers and civilians, all of them wearing the same look of determination that I had seen in Verena's eyes. "These are my people," Verena said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. "They've been fighting in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike." I watched as the group approached, their leader stepping forward to greet Verena. He was a tall, imposing figure with a sharp jawline and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through me. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice filled with respect. "It's an honor to have you back." Verena nodded, her expression resolute. "The honor is mine, General," she said. "I'm ready to take back what's ours." The general gave a curt nod and motioned for his soldiers to fall in line. "We've been preparing for this day," he said. "The regime is strong, but they've grown complacent. With your leadership, we can turn the tide." Verena's gaze shifted to the soldiers, her green eyes filled with determination. "This is the moment we've been waiting for," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "We fight for Astria, for our people, for our future." Her words sent a chill down my spine, and I could see the fire in the eyes of the soldiers around us. This wasn't just a battle for survival. This was a battle for freedom, for justice, for the very soul of a planet. As the soldiers prepared for the coming fight, I felt a surge of determination wash over me. I wasn't just a bystander in this. I was part of something bigger, something that mattered. And together, we would take back Astria.